Last night, of course, the United National Congress had their town meeting in San Fernando, and basically based on education, getting the information from the general public, and getting that information, and perhaps taking it, of course, and getting things ready for the general election. Joining us is a man who's no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to former Education Minister Dr. Tim Goopesingh. Pleasant good evening to you, Doc.
Good evening to you, Mikey, and good evening to your viewers and listeners.
First of all, let me say great job last night.
Well, it's a job of the honorable political leader who envisaged that there are a few areas of serious national concern. Well, of course, crime, and we had a number of town hall meetings on crime. And she thought it absolutely necessary to engage the population in discussions on education. I believe health might be the next one, and of course, the economy. I think these are the four major areas that the honorable political leader is engaging the national population in discussions at a high level in terms of where we need to go, what we have done, and then, of course, what our policies and programs for the future, which we promise to the population. So the political leader is very strong on moving forward with these town hall meetings and getting the views of the national population on in terms of the formation of our policies and programs.
Yeah, I want to look at this, at the education policies of the UNC. I mean, we're looking at post-budget conversation that we're having right here, of course. And a lot of it dealt with recurring expenditure and, of course, money that can be accounted for. But going back and looking at the People's Partnership led by Kamla Prasad-Bissessar, there was an increase. When you look at the budget, there was always about laptop programs, expansion of the GATE program, the creation of a drilling academy, the El Dorado Nursing Academy, and the list goes on and on. How important does Kamla Prasad-Bissessar look when it comes to human capital development?
This was a major plank for the election of 2010 in terms of knowledge-based society and human capital development, and ensuring a knowledge-based society. So her major plank in 2010 focused a lot on education, and so that the budgetary allocation for health was the leading budget for the 5 years. That was the amount of efforts and energy that the Honorable Prime Minister at that time, Mrs. Bissessar, placed on education, so that a knowledge-based society, human capital development formed the core of management in terms of development of Trinidad and Tobago. So she ensured allocation, not more than what we're having now. It used to be around about 7.5 billion during our 2010 to 2015, but it was utilized in an economic manner and in a productive manner to successfully deal with the programs and policies that we had put into our manifesto in 2010, and which we were able to complete in terms of the success of implementation of these policies by 2014. And you would remember, we became the first country in the world to achieve universal early childhood education, as stated by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2014, when he addressed Caribbean prime ministers in Barbados. He told the Caribbean prime ministers that Trinidad became the first country in the world to have achieved the universal early childhood education. Then in 2014, we had the best academic performance in all examinations in the SEA and the CSEC and the CAPE, and we bettered that in 2015. So we were in parallel with a number of the developed countries in terms of our education sector, in terms of what Singapore and South Korea and Japan and Hong Kong were achieving. We were able to achieve those. In fact, our education system was praised by then presidential candidate Mrs.
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton.
I
And we achieved.
Yeah.
We received global awards for our work. We were invited by the Qatar Foundation, which is one of the premier foundations in education globally. And we were honored in Qatar Foundation for the work that we were doing in education. Well, when we speak about the laptop program, 95,000 laptops given to students. We had all our secondary schools with computer classrooms, and some of these schools had up to about 3 to 5 computer rooms with approximately 50 computers being serviced by 150 IT technicians. And then we moved to the primary schools, and over 300 primary schools as well had computer rooms, and students were working in the computer rooms in the primary schools. Over 120 of these schools had Wi-Fi connectivity, some at an average of about 30 megabits per second. So we were at the forefront in the world, in Latin America and the Caribbean, in terms of our information technology with the laptops. And then concurrent with that, under the Infrastructure Development Fund and the Public Sector Investment Program, we continue to build our schools. And as everyone knows, we built 106 schools. We built about 37 primary schools, about 62 or 63 early childhood education centers, and we did completed about 7 secondary schools. We left about 70 schools for continued construction under PNM. But within 1 year, the PNM administration decimated the education sector. It is very, very saddening that in just 1 year, Minister Lovell and Minister Garcia found it necessary not to continue most of the successful programs that Mrs. Bissessar had started under her term and under her regime as Prime Minister. Very successful performances between 2010 and 2015. And within 1 year, there was a swift and precipitous reversal of all the gains and successes that we had made in the education sector. We did a revision of the early childhood education curriculum, the primary school curriculum, and the secondary school curriculum, because we had 2 successful workshops with about 500 educators at different times of our administration, giving us some ideas and helping us with our programs and policies implementation. So we moved, then we had over 400 homework centers. We bought over 2 million textbooks for students. Every child in every class and every subject in every school received the textbook. In 2012, we standardized the type of textbooks that we were using. The principals were allowed to choose either one of 2 textbooks at a time. And school repair programs, we did over 5,000 school repair programs over the 5 years, so that students' educational pursuit could be in the rooms and in the schools where they felt comfortable in an environment. And we did over 5,000 repair projects in the 5 years. We're utilizing over 500 different contractors. So every day, about 5 schools break down in Trinidad, because out of the 455 primary schools, about 5 will break down, and because there are about 50% of them that are more than 50 years of age. So it is understandable. But in 9 years, this present administration have built no new schools. They completed about 4 or 5 of the schools that we started. So it's very sad and very damning on this administration.
And let me ask you, you said something quite interesting just now. I mean, when you look at this complete system that has broken down, in the heights of the pandemic, Prime Minister Rowley made it clear that almost 2,000 students fell through the cracks. And when you look at what's happening now with crime and all these situations, do you believe that we're paying a price for that?
But it's not 2,000, it's over 100,000 students over a 2-year period were unable to receive an education because they did not have any type of support system from the education sector, nor they had any devices. Imagine a government having to beg the private sector to purchase devices for students. So 2 years, Mikee, within 2 years, over 100,000 students were disenfranchised from their education. And hence, over 9,000 students. Recently, you would have seen it in 2023. Over 9,000 students failed the SEA examination, and almost 3,000 of those failed to get more than 30% of passes. And you had a 45% pass rate in mathematics and even less in English language. We achieved a 97 to 98% success rate in the Cape, and we have about 65 to 70% pass rate in mathematics and language. So Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, as Prime Minister, placed a tremendous amount of emphasis on education and the human capital development. And then at the tertiary education too, Mikey, you remember the GATE program was increased. We moved tertiary education participation from 42% to 72%. Then we had a number of areas in tertiary education with the UTT becoming stronger. Then we had a number of tech vox centers across MIC, NSDP, YTEP. A number of these programs under Minister Karim at that time were very, very successful. And so we were carrying tech vox education at a higher level. In the secondary schools, we started with 42 schools when we came into office. Doing tech vox education, we carried it to 102 schools. We started the Girl Guide movement, the Boy Scout movements, so that we had parenting and education workshops for over 100,000 parents. And Mrs. Bisesa, as Prime Minister at that time, ensured, she told me to make sure that we have enough guidance officer, guidance counselors, behavioral and clinical psychologists. So when we came in, there were over 250. We moved that to nearly 700, so that each of the secondary schools, 125 secondary schools, would have at least one behavioral or educational psychologist or clinical psychologist, and we had and even psychiatrists as well within the system. And so we worked arduously to reduce the incidence of school violence as well, because we had a 24 plan program and policies that we implemented, some of which were the increase in the amount of behavioral and clinical psychologists in the Student Support Services Division. We had parenting and education. We brought back the 72 boards that were public bodies that were aligned to education. We reenacted that so that citizens living close to schools could become part of the school's work and so on. Then we established about 4 centers with these behavioral psychologists and clinical psychologists and psychiatrists across the country to deal with the students and to continue to motivate them and educate them and carry them forward in the process where they are being retrained.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Goopesingh. I mean, looking at trying to basically absorb all that you're saying, and it's quite a lot, and it makes so much sense. I mean, basically nipping the problem in the bud, going after it, getting to the source of it, and neutralizing it, but it seems that it's so different at this point in time. Take us back to the assessments, because we get the feeling now that there are people who are just simply working good enough to stay hired, and perhaps just good enough not to be fired, and our children are paying a price for that. And when you talk about a time when there was so much enthusiasm, where teachers came out, where they wanted to participate, they saw these programs, they saw what was taking place, they saw all of these advanced things that were being done. But at this critical stage that we're at, many of our children are way behind. And we're talking about things like AI technology and so many things that are being introduced now when it comes to learning globally. Give us an idea, when you look at the assessment, how this entire thing was operated from step 1 all the way up to that time of graduation, where we were producing the best type of students.
We made a determined effort that all our teachers will be fully trained for primary schools. So we gave a lot of scholarships for teachers who were not fully qualified in the primary schools to receive their Bachelor's of Education qualification. So when we demitted office, there was no primary school in Trinidad where there was any teacher without a Bachelor's of Education degree. Then we ensured that those with bachelor's degree, we encouraged them, we gave scholarships to go to their masters, many of them went to their PhDs. Then we trained over 6,000 teachers in a period of time in information technology, alternate dispute resolution, to deal with students who are dysfunctional, and then of course in mathematics and language and English language, we had a number of teachers trained. We brought in moderators, facilitators, substitute teachers into the school programs. So some schools had a moderator with a one-to-one approach to students. All of this was lost during the 9 years of the PNM administration. So it is not surprising that you have massive failure rates within the education system. The Minister of Education at the moment, unfortunately, she cannot deal with it, nor a deputy. They are both. It is beyond them at this time. It is beyond the government at this time, Mikey, to be able to deal with the education sector because they don't have the management and they don't have the competence. They don't have the willpower, as Mrs. Bissessa had, to bring a knowledge-based society to Trinidad. In all aspects of education, she was at the forefront of all of this. I was a vehicle to be able to implement a number of the policies and programs that she wanted to have implemented. And so her drive was in information technology. Her drive was in, we changed the curriculum in secondary schools as well. And in primary schools, as I told you, we brought in morals, values, ethics, citizenry development, character, and so on. But we tested the students on those, and we were moving away from the SEA into a continuous base assessment where students were assessed in Standard 4 and Standard 5 and gave 20% of the marks for the students. And we were moving that to Standard 3 where 30% of the marks would have been given. And then at Standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the students would have been assessed. What was important, we started the whole aspect of neurodiagnostic testing of students where when we get into government again, this will be one of the foremost aspects of our movement forward. All students age 4 and 5 in our schools will have a neurodiagnostic testing so we can understand and appreciate where the students are, what type of deficiencies they may have. And we did a lot of research over the time that we were there to researching over 3,000 students, 1,500 from primary schools and 1,500 from early childhood education centers. And we were able to find that with parenting support, over 25% of students improved their performance within a 6-month period. There are about 7% of our school population with neurodevelopmental disabilities, functional disabilities. So we were able to identify students and we were able to begin to have citizens working with these students with developmental abilities, developmental disabilities in schools, so that we were looking after, we funded 14 private schools for students with disabilities, and we had 11 of our government schools, so 25 schools working for students with functional disabilities. So it's a matter of understanding where we were
and all
programs and policies.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying there, Doc, is that throughout the entire assessment, once there were indicators, anything that came up, you had people who were on board to assist and deal with those situations.
Yes, we implemented the programs and the policies to deal with the problems. For instance, over 100,000 parents participated in parenting and education workshops so that they got an understanding of what are some of their responsibilities as a parent, what is expected of them as well. And so then we had career fairs between the Minister of Tertiary Education and myself, we both joined together collaboratively, and we exposed the students in Form 5 and even some Form 4 and then Form 6 in terms of understanding future career path developments for themselves. And then we gave scholarships, over 500 scholarships per year to these students. Now the government has whittled it down to 50. They say they're giving bursaries, but giving bursaries to their own P&M political patronage. And they have removed meritocracy from the program altogether. They don't want to publish the names of the 200 students who have passed the SEA examinations. They don't want to publish the names of the schools and the scholarships, the schools that have won the scholarships. It is a deliberate attempt by this government to, in fact, I would say, just remove education from the face of Trinidad and Tobago, because they have done everything against it and not to support it.
And let me ask you, 15-year-old St. Stephen's College student, of course, Jaden Lalchan, we're now hearing, of course, that the TTPS will not charge anyone for the death of the young man, citing insufficient evidence to prove bullying played a role in his death. I'm certain that there were policies in place to deal with such situations as well.
We had implemented, it's very sad to continue to speak about this poor child and the parents, of course, and the friends and the students who were around him, for us to understand what has happened to the poor boy that he committed suicide. It's still very heartbreaking. But we had implemented, we cannot say, Mikey, that we can get rid of bullying in school. We cannot get rid of it completely, but we can reduce the amount of negatives behaviors of students. And we did our research when we went in 2010. And we went back to 1985, where there were about, from 85 to 2010, there are about 4 commissions of inquiry. Basically, research work that was done in terms of school behavioral problems of students, violence in schools. And we implemented about 24 different programs, some of which I enumerated earlier on, and we were getting tremendous success. And in terms of crime in schools, we gave each one of the schools 2 handheld scanners so that the principals and the deans of discipline and so on in school were able to implement using these handheld scanners so that students would not bring knives and weapons into the school. And then we introduced in secondary schools these devices that you use at the airport for when you're walking in to scan you. We had about 4 of those, and we moved them around in the various secondary schools, so students were aware that we were on the watch for their negative behavior, and there was good behavior from them. We also got support from the police service to move students out of school as fast on evenings rather than loitering around in the school. We hired over 150 health and safety officers in schools so that they would be able to manage the intermission times and the lunch times and ensure good behavior amongst these students, and on the evenings when they're leaving schools as well. So we had a multiplicity of programs. We had management leadership teams in schools using the principals, vice principal, deans of discipline, a student alumni, and a leader of the student body in the school, so that all these things were looked at from a focused perspective rather than leaving it willy-nilly for things to just happen.
Yeah.
So it was a focused 5-year period where the Prime Minister, Mr. Bisesa, ensured that policies and programs were implemented to the benefit of the people, of the students of Trinidad and Tobago, where nearly 300,000 students in our schools were kept at a high level of education.
And you know, Doc, I have to agree with you. You really have to have that vision, and you have to have that will to understand how important it is. Last night, of course, at the town hall meeting, somebody made a very valid point. I think it was a teacher, And he said that, at school, we're still doing the chalkboard and the whole chalk method. But when these students get home, they are doing everything so fast on these these devices. And so there's such a disconnection. One would ask that why would the government not make such an investment rather than spending money on so many different things when human capital development is so important, it is so critical when it is that you have a country of people who really and truly want to learn, and there's this hunger for learning. I mean, why are our young people being deprived of these opportunities?
Well, you remember when Prime Minister Rowley came in, he said we were giving laptops to Dudley Head students,
Yeah.
Which was, it was a shame for a prime minister to think that way. And 9 years later, he should be ashamed of making that statement. And for 9 years, they kept the IT programs away from these students because for their own reason, because of hate and spite and maliciousness and vindictiveness, because we implemented programs that were successful, they feel that they must disenfranchise the student body from those mechanisms of success which we implemented. And it is very sad. This government has to hang their heads in shame, Mikey. They're totally incompetent. They mismanage the country, almost every sector. I am speaking to you on education alone now tonight, but you see it in health, you see it in the economy, you see it in social services, unemployment, people suffering, and the crime situation is at its worst. Yeah. So this government really needs to be removed as quickly as possible. I'm sure the citizens are waiting to exhale, to show that this dislike for this government, and to vote in our competent United National Congress government. Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa as Prime Minister ran a marvelous and a tremendously successful 5-year term of governance in this country, in almost every aspect of governance. So her reign as Prime Minister between 2010 and 2015, I've been in politics for over 30 years, and I would say convincingly that her government, our government between 2010 and 2015 had been the most successful government ever in the history of this country. What the people of this country achieved, what they received between 2010 and 2015, no other government has been able to provide the types of benefits for the citizens and for the students of this country.
Thank you so much.
We are given that opportunity again, which we hope that the citizens will provide us with that opportunity to govern again. I'm sure we will repeat and even better our performance between 2010 and 2015.
Thank you.
Support Mrs. Bisesa and her team for the election, and Trinidad and Tobago will begin to become a knowledge-based society, will be a country for the future, and will be at the highest level in terms of Caribbean-wise and internationally. Just let me make this point on
Go right ahead,
Mikey.
Go ahead.
When Mrs. Bisesa came in July in 2010 and she appointed me as minister, she said, Minister, I want the first set of laptops to be delivered to these students in September. And we had to get our heads together. She appointed a team to assist me, a 5-member team of ministers, an interministerial team, and we worked assiduously. By September, October, we had the first 19,000 laptops given to students entering from the primary school into secondary school. And while we were doing that, we were leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of the ICT programs. President Putin was now beginning to have about 3,000 schools in Russia with IT programs and laptop programs for these students in the schools. And President Obama asked a number of these companies like Sprint and so on, these high-tech companies, to help him with $100 million each. 10 of them gave $100 million each to help the students with ICT programs and laptops in areas where the students were disenfranchised and were at a situation where they could not have afforded to do the things that they wanted for these schools. So we were on par the Organization of American States realized how Trinidad and Tobago were at the forefront of ICT in education. And we were named as a Center for Virtual Education in ICT for Latin America and the Caribbean. Those are some of the achievements that we achieved between 2010 and 2015.
Hats off to you, Dr. Goopesingh. Thank you so much for taking time out this evening. Very insightful. Keep up the good work. And as you said, once the citizens do the right thing, we can get back to that level. Especially.
I want to just remind the population too, it was Mrs. Bissessar as Minister of Education between 97 to 2000. Ensure that no child will be left behind without a secondary education. And she, with Mr. Pandey, built a number of secondary schools so that between the 7,000 to 10,000 students who were left out of a secondary school education between 1962 to 2000 came to an end when Mrs. Bissessar, as Minister of Education, ensured that there were enough schools and places in the secondary schools to house all the students. So between 62 to 2000, 38 years, multiply that by about 7,000. Over 250,000 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago did not receive a secondary education in Trinidad. Between 62 to 2000, 38 years, at an average of 5,000 students being left out of a secondary school place, we have close to over 200,000 citizens who did not receive, and it will be more like 300,000, who were unable to receive a secondary school education because of the unavailability of places in a school. And this is what Mrs. Bissessar and Prime Minister Pandey put an end to in 2000. So her pursuit in education is unparalleled. Her ability in education has been unparalleled. And so the knowledge and the drive and the enthusiasm for her to run Trinidad and Tobago is along this pathway. Make it one of the best countries in the world in terms of...
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Goopesingh. Keep up the good work and best of luck to you and the entire team. And it's been very, very insightful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you.